And when I'd get home, my daughter would already be asleep. And I felt that, I felt really bad because that precious time as she's growing up, I wasn't able to be around as much. I mean, it was great. I was being able to earn a lot of money by doing so many hours, but that time isn't something I can buy back. And so, I have four children now, and my two youngest, I realized I really didn't want to replicate that again. I didn't want to have to go through that where I'm not around, I'm constantly at work. And I thought, what can I do where I can maybe work from home more and be around? My name is Edward Norris. I am 39 years old. I originally grew up in Westminster in London. I was pretty much there the majority of my life until the last, I guess you could say, almost 2 years, where now we are living in Hertfordshire, so outside of London, very different and new for us. My current occupation is art director for our Creative Equals agency.
So I know you through the fitness circle and the fitness scene. So when I saw, you have this what would you call it, a creative agency?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
creative.
So when I saw that you have this creative agency, I was like, what? Like I knew Eddie as a personal trainer. So could you start from the beginning of your kind of like your personal training journey? Like what got you into personal training and how long did you end up doing it for?
So, just before personal training, I was always doing design and graphic design, illustration, drawing, etc. Anything creative, because I just used to really love doing that. And I was always very, very slim and very underweight. I think up until I was 23 years old, I was, I guess you could say, 60 kilos, which is roughly around 10 stone. I'm 6'3", so that's pretty underweight for my height. Um, and so I never even thought about, going to the gym or training or doing any kind of exercise. And I think one day, I was speaking with my partner and, she noticed I had been losing quite a lot of weight. And I know some people find this really weird, but I don't find it offensive at all. But, she did mention that she started to feel a little bit less attracted to me, but because I was so underweight. And I know some people think, oh, how can you say that or anything? I mean, like, it doesn't stop them from loving me. It's just they're just being brutally honest, and it would be the same vice versa, right? If she had gained a ridiculous amount, and it's not like a little bit. It's more she was concerned also about my health and everything. I do remember a comment that her sister made when we were out for a night, and she says, "Oh, Eddie needs to start eating more. He's looking like a cancer patient." And I was like, "Whoa, is it really that bad?" And I look at the pictures now, and you don't really notice until afterwards. So I was like, "Okay, let me see how this goes." So I went onto YouTube, started looking up some videos, and seeing how to perform exercises. I think being a perfectionist within design and very OCD about things, I kind of brought that over into the fitness side of my life. And so I started off training at home. I got some dumbbells. I started getting protein shakes, trying different shakes, weight gain to just see if I can gain some weight. And eventually it worked, and I did, and it was great. And then all of a sudden, I remember my cousin's husband said to me, "Oh, do you want to come to the gym?" And I was like, "Sure, let's go to the gym." And I've never been to the gym. And so he took me to I think it was in West Hampstead, and it's the gym group. And this was a long time ago. They didn't have as many, and I don't even think Pure Gym was around at that time. And so we went there, and the problem though was he was working in security, and he could only go to the gym at like 4 a.m. So for
Yes.
one whole year, I was like, he was picking me up. We'd go to the gym. I'd then train with him. Then he would drop me back home. I'd go to sleep and then wake up and go to work. And I did that for so long. And I remember in a meeting when I was introduced to the company that I was working at, my boss basically was introducing me, and her one of her facts that she wanted to put out there was he also goes to the gym at 4 a.m. I was like, oh my God, everyone's just thinking, what is wrong with this guy? I was like, great, that's a great way to introduce me to everyone. um but after that I thought, okay, this is quite fun. I got into it. I noticed a lot of change, and I was able to really hone in on that part of my life. um I then all of a sudden was thinking, I was speaking with some friends, and they said to me, oh, well, why would you not ever do this full time? And I was like, I don't know. I said, I've never really thought about it. And I thought, design was my passion and fitness was like my hobby. And so they were like, oh, maybe you should try swap them and see how that goes. So I was like, okay, let me think about it. I thought, right, let's try and see how this could work. I was currently going to gym box in on St. Martin's Lane in Covent Garden, and I thought, okay, I've been going there for a while. I've kind of recognized quite a few of the staff and the other PTs, and made really good friends with the manager at the time. And I said, oh, it's right to have a chat. I sat down with him, had a talk with him, and I was just, trying to find out like what it's like, what happens, and everything else. And he then afterwards was like, yeah, sure, we had a chat, great, gave me all the information. And then he texted me later on that day and saying, I just want to let you know, no pressure, but I have a position available if it's something that you want to do. And so I was like, okay, this will be interesting. Before that, obviously, I've obviously skipped a part, was I decided to go get my qualification. And I did a 6 week crash course. I was there for 6 weeks. I was very fortunate that my work, although they only give 3 weeks holiday, I had a very good relationship with the company and, the team in HR. And they were like, we're happy to give you the 6 weeks to be able to do this. They obviously knew that this is something that I was probably going to go into and leave. However, it was nice of them to be able to do that. So I had 3 weeks paid, 3 weeks unpaid, and I was able to get my qualification, and that was great. Um, I had a bit of time to think about it, and then I thought, is this something that I want to do? And I said, you know what? What's the worst that could happen?
Mm,
I just have to find another job. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I think at the time, my eldest child, she was still very, very young. I think she was only like 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And I was thinking to myself, I have to make this work. Like, I need to make this work. So I decided, I'm gonna take it. I took the position, and then I kind of just went on from there. Um,
mm,
Something that was very difficult was I wasn't used to, speaking out, doing like classes or anything like that. So what I ended up trying to do was I basically got loads of friends and did free classes in Regent's
mm.
Park for months and months in the lead up to when I actually started. So for 3 months, I was just like, guys, come down, and everything else. And just to build my confidence and being able to teach and feel comfortable in that environment. And then, yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up getting into it, I guess. So that was quite a
And
long
how?
explanation.
No, no, it's necessary, man. How long was how long were you in fitness, or how long were you a personal trainer for?
So I was a personal trainer for 11 years. So I currently officially stopped in 2023, I think it was. I always get very confused. So last year, no. Okay, so the last gym that I was at, I left in 2022 in December. And then I went freelance to basically slowly shift my way back into doing design full time. Um, and that's where that shift sort of came through. And then during the last 2 years, I've pretty much now not, I've stopped doing PT completely. It was just trying to taper it off rather than just automatically stop. Um, yeah.
And what was the tipping point? What was the reason for the change? Like,
I think, and I don't like to use age as a as a main reason for that. However, I think I've been doing fitness for so long, and I realize, and I'll be very honest, that passion for it starts to go. And
mm,
I'm I have incredible relationships with all of my clients. You know, I've made really good friends with a lot of them. And it came to a point where I said, I feel like I'm doing you an injustice because I feel that, you know, I'm training the same people for years and years and years. And yes, for them, it's more the accountability. They want me to be able to just make sure that they are training and they are getting their exercise in. But at the same time, you know, I felt that, you know, maybe they need a refresh, maybe they need someone who's going to be a bit more
Mhm.
enthusiastic and have a little bit more love for the job that they're doing. And
Mm.
I think I came to that conclusion that fitness and design, it really was more the hobby in fitness,
Mm.
and design has always been my passion. During that
Mm.
period of 11 years anyway, I was still doing design, I was still doing commissions, I was still doing freelance work, and working, still honing my skills and everything. However, I think with the fitness, I think I noticed with my with my oldest daughter, during that time, I think everyone knows when you're a PT, the majority of the hours that you'll probably be working are peak hours. It's when the
Mm.
gym will be
Mm.
mostly busy, right? Whether it's early morning, lunchtime, or evening. Now, for me, I never had a problem with just doing the whole day and being in the gym the whole day. And so, for the first 5 years, especially, you know, I would be starting at 7 and then finishing sometimes 9 p.m. And when I'd get home, you know, my daughter would already be asleep. And I felt that, you know, I felt really bad because that precious time as she's growing up, I wasn't able to be around as much. I mean, it was great. I was being able to earn a lot of money by doing so many hours, but that time isn't something I can buy back. And so, you know, I have 4 children now, and my two youngest, I realized I really didn't want to replicate that again. I didn't want to have to go through that where I'm not around, I'm constantly at work. And I thought, what can I do where I can maybe work from home more and be around? I know there is always options of doing online training and everything, and that's great. But again, I guess it kind of it worked in both ways where I felt that the passion had gone, and at the same time, I don't. I wanted to be around them more. I will have the ability to be able to, you know, take a break, spend a little bit of time with them, pick up my kids from school. I mean, yesterday was my youngest son's first sports day, and so you know, I was able to go with all the other parents, and it was really nice. Got to record it and got to be there, and he was really happy. So that's something that kind of made me want to switch and change into that role.
It's interesting because um there's two people that I've interviewed recently who got into fitness kind of later in life. The last guy became a PT when he was 68. And he is still a PT at 77, and he's still going strong. Um, but oftentimes the examples that you get are people will say like in a corporate job first, um, and then they've gone from that corporate job and then they've got into fitness and personal training, whereas yours kind of like flipped completely the other way. But oddly enough, it's like for the same reasons. So for the same reasons of, not being able to see your family at the right time and all of this. Um, but yeah, but you've explained that graphic design, illustration is your passion, and fitness was your hobby. Um, what did friends and family think of the switch? Were they 100% behind it, or?
Well, yeah, I guess yes and no. My partner, Sean, she is an incredible support of everything I
Mm.
do. Like genuinely, she supports any decision that she knows I have a really big passion for and that I'm really trying to strive for. Um, I am a massive workaholic. I know that
Mm.
already. I will work as many hours as it takes, and
Mm.
I'm 100% with that. Um, she was definitely supportive in that. You know, my kids, especially my oldest kids, they were supportive. They loved the fact that, you know, I'd be more available, I guess is the best way to put it. Friends, same, but you know, they obviously have questions, and it's very hard because it's trying to explain to people what your dream or what your goal is, and they're never going to fully understand because it's not their dream. You know, it's not something that they want, they're trying to achieve. My parents, my dad was very supportive. He just, you know, he's very much on the way of, you know, do what makes you happy. That's fine. My mum, on the other hand, is she's more, she wants me to be okay, and I think that's why she questions certain things, but she's more it's more of a worry, you know. It's very much like, are you going to be okay, is everything going to be all right, you know, sort of thing. And it's probably because she just doesn't understand fully what I'm doing, how do I make money from what do I do, you know. She doesn't quite understand that part. um and my sister as well, yeah, she was very supportive. She loves it. They love what I create, and I'm always sharing things that I'm doing all the time, so it's always really nice to get that feedback.
See, my so as I said, like I've known you from like the fitness circles, and my dilemma with fitness is I love fitness. I have a passion for it, ever since I was really young. Um, but the idea of becoming a personal trainer, sometimes I entertain the idea, and other times I'm like, is this going to turn my passion into a chore? Is it going to turn something that I love into something that, I will end up kind of not liking because I'm having to motivate people to do something that for me just comes easy. So yeah, that was another reason why I was like interested in speaking to you, like having gone the other way,
Yeah.
with doing personal training, and then now kind of like more the kind of the corporate side of things. So yeah, how would you, so like when people ask you what you do for a living, like how do you like kind of fully describe that?
um it's always fun, this, but I guess whenever I'm trying to explain it to people, and it's a very hard one, it's, if people don't understand what you do, they label it as something a lot less bigger than maybe it actually is. So, as an example, when we're thinking of personal training, you know, when you tell people I'm a personal trainer, they're automatic. Not everyone, but I've heard it many times over the years. You know, oh, you just tell people what to do with the weights and everything like that. And you think to yourself, yeah, but it's not exactly like that, but there's a lot more to it than that. And it really depends, obviously, on the individual and the person who's doing the job. You know, maybe there are some people who do that. um, so in this situation, when it comes to design, everyone just thinks, oh, you just make logos, you know, you make things look, you know, pretty and stuff like that. And I'm always like, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. So I co-own our creative agency with three other guys, and I am in charge mainly of, I guess I sign off anything visually when stuff gets done. They know that I'm very particular on design. I'm very, very uh, critical on specific things that we create, and when we have people work with us, how that how that gets executed. So I'm very, very. I could say I'm probably hard to work with in that situation, but it's just because I want everything to be as best as we can possibly do. You know, I really, that passion really comes through. And so I say to everyone, you know, my role is art director. However, you know, we've been trading for a year and a half now, you know, officially, when we launched last February 1st. And I guess at the moment, with any new business that you start, you end up taking on roles that maybe aren't particularly the things that you want to do. So for example,
Mm,
sales isn't necessarily something that I want to do, really. But at the same time, you know, everyone in the team and everyone has to contribute to all the different areas, because, you know, we're still starting out, and, you know, we don't have main basically specific people dedicated to that role, you know,
mm,
which is fine. So it's pretty much, we're doing a bit of everything. You know, there's a lot of hands on, but if I was to go on more the specifics, you know, I deal with everything branding and digital. So would say our company is split up into two sections. So we have the film production side, and then we have branding and digital. Um, Between the four of us, myself and my colleague Arthur, we manage that branding and digital, and then the film productions managed by my other two colleagues. Um, the way that we probably work is we split depending on our skill sets. So my main skill set is graphic design, illustration, web design, and I guess you could say I do video editing as well because I know how to use Premiere Pro. I know how to use Adobe Suite. However, it's not my main, but I know it inside out. But I'd rather have someone else be able to take over that if that was the case. Um, and for example, web development, I know CSS. I understand. I can write code. But again, if we have someone, for example, my colleague Arthur, who knows web development inside out, I can add and help with it, but it's not my main. It won't be my main. And so yeah, that's pretty much, I guess. It's always a hard one to explain what you do. I always feel like it's, especially if you're in control of so many different things, it's hard to be very specific. And there are so many things in everything. The same thing if I was a personal trainer, when I was a personal trainer, it's like, what do you do? I was like, well, I'm also writing programs for clients. I'm trying to make sure they're all specific. I do consultations with them. We do fitness assessments. I write their nutrition. I track what they're eating. I have regular updates. I'm doing like strength work, bodybuilding work. Some people are looking for different areas to focus on. There are so many areas of fitness that also that comes into play. So in the same thing with design, there are so many areas. We're trying to cover everything. But the one thing I guess I would say is that the our agency is something that we try to make sure that we can fulfill every creative need that's possible. But yeah.
Well, I mean, the year and a half that you've been kind of like it's been official, like from your LinkedIn, you have quite a portfolio of jobs that you've done. So you seem to have hit the ground running. Um, where during the 11 years that you were personal training, were you maintaining these skills? Because you've always been into graphic design before personal training. Were you doing any of that kind of work like on a freelance basis or?
Yeah, 100%. Funny thing is, I've had this before, and I've said this conversation before with people, and I feel like people are very visual, right? We're very visual people. Unfortunately, we judge things when we first see them, how we see them, without knowing the rest of the information behind it. And so when it came to like PT and everything, um, I know it's definitely changed in the last 11 years for sure, and how we approach fitness. Everything's a lot more, it's expanded so much. However, I feel back then, it was very much, you'd see before and afters, right? And that's when you'd be like, oh my God, I want to go with this person because, look at all these before and afters of clients. I mean, I was very fortunate to be able to have so many clients give me the opportunity to give them a before and after. And that obviously helped me generate more clients, have more recommendations, etc. I do feel that working on your strengths is always very important. And um, you would have some incredible PTs who are super knowledgeable. However, they just never could market themselves well enough to bring on the clients. Whether it was their communication skills, they just couldn't convert and converse what they were trying to say to a client to get them to want to train with them and to sign up. So for me, I had my design background. So in my mind, I was like, you know what? I'm going to use that to my advantage as much as possible. And so I remember before I started, I mean, it went through lots of iterations over the years. I think I did 3 versions in the end, but I designed my programs a way that was so appealing, with these booklets, these PDFs, these interactive PDFs. You could click on it, it would open up, and there's a video of how to perform the exercise. I wanted it to look as professional as possible. My website, same thing. You got many PTs where they're like, I need to get a logo for my brand. I need to for my PT business. I need to get a website done. And they're trying to find people to be able to help them. Also, it's money, it costs money. Whereas for myself, I was like, I can do it all myself.
Mm.
I can make everything look as slick as possible, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I would create my programs. I'd be working on the software that I would always be using. to create throughout my entire time as a PT, honestly. And I think during that time, you make really good friends with the PTs and your colleagues throughout the years. They're like, "Oh, Eddie, um, could you take a look at this? Would you be able to help
Mm,
me with this?" And I love to be able to help and teach people with this stuff. It's one of those things that, when you're really into it, like I can't help but just talk about it. And then they can tell I just won't shut up. I'll just be like, "Oh my God, you should try this, do this," And I also want them to be able to learn it because you want to be able to have the ability to be able to create something yourself. Um,
mm,
and I think back then we didn't have things like Canva. Now, personally, I don't
mm,
use
mm.
that. There's nothing wrong
Yeah,
with
yeah.
it. I think it's a very good piece of software, especially if you're
Yeah.
not a designer or anything. And we
Hmm.
didn't have AI either. We didn't have the options
Yeah.
to generate anything specific. And
Mm,
so, I would create all this stuff and constantly make sure that, my skills are constantly there. I would also do freelance stuff, like I said, PTs, clients that I made. I was very fortunate with the type of clientele that I had. They
mm.
knew I could do this stuff, so they would ask, "Hey,
Wow.
would you mind taking a look at this?" And I'm like, "Of course." I was like, "Yeah." And a lot of the time, I don't even care about charging for it. It's not really about that. For me, it was just I wanted to be able to make sure I'm constantly doing it, being able to continuously build my portfolio, even when it's not my full-time job during
Mm,
that
mm, mm,
11-year span, is something I wanted to make sure I could continue with. So things like artwork and drawing, and that's something that my daughter loved drawing. I would sit with her and just constantly draw. Again, it's very different because what we had back then, especially like the digital capabilities. So like, I draw on my iPad now, clearly, which is right behind me.
mm,
But back then, you didn't have an Apple Pencil. You weren't able. There was no such thing as Procreate and all these other like amazing platforms and apps that you could use. So
mm,
it was very much. I need to be able to be on my computer, make sure I can, create this, make sure I can keep up with the times and make sure my skills are still being worked on. Practice
mm.
makes perfect, even though you're never going to be perfect because it's always evolving. So yeah.
That's great because it's like listening to the basics of your story. One could assume, he shouldn't have done the PTing. He should have just gone straight into graphic design. But it's
Yeah.
almost like the PTing helped to kind of sharpen your sword. It helped to expose you to marketing. It helped potentially expose you to kind of soft selling, and it helped you to kind of practice the illustration itself.
Oh, 100%, especially the soft selling. It's I remember when I've had meetings with my colleagues now, and we always talk about sales, and they always say, "Eddie, it's like you're really good at it and everything," and I'm like, "Am I?" And they're like, "Yeah," and I say to them, "Do you know what? To be perfectly honest, I do feel that the background in PT and being able to sell yourself and your service." Because it's more of a service than a product, which is the same in design. I'm selling a service. I don't have anything physical, and so being able to, I guess, build that trust, build the rapport, build the relationship. I had done it so many times. Like the number of we'd always be given like taster sessions. A client would sign up to the gym, they get a free session with a PT, and you'd get sent to you. And so it was like the amount of times you're I guess repeating and trying to perfect how you come across is in 11 years I was able to definitely make it better than when I first started. And for me, I know there are many people in the way that they sell, and whatever works for everyone is completely fine. I think for myself, I'd never hard sell. It's not something that I wanted to do, and very similar to other people I know is it's not about me, and
Mm,
that's the thing. I don't like being center stage. It's why I never
mm,
competed in the fitness industry, where people had said, I had built a physique that should try and compete, see how it would work. I just never wanted to be on stage. I never wanted that focus on me. And I think
mm,
even
mm,
my PT business, I never even called it my name. Loads of
mm,
people have, Eddie Norris Fitness or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
mm, mm,
However, I still didn't want it about me. So mine was 60
mm,
degrees of fitness. It had nothing to do with me. I never
mm,
put myself in there, no pictures, no nothing, because
mm,
just for me, that like my fitness on myself is for myself. That's it. And
mhm,
I wanted
mhm.
everything else to be about them. And so
Yeah.
when I would sell, it wouldn't even be a sell. It would be very much, look, this is what I offer. This is the stuff that I do. However, you take the time to think, even if you think that actually this person's better for you, then go with that person.
Mm,
It's your
mm,
money, it's your time, and that's
mm,
important. And I wanted them to understand the genuine my genuine I guessness to how I am as a person, and I wanted to portray that as much as possible so that even if they don't choose to go with me, at least, I've had a good conversation. If they think of someone else and, maybe they decide not to do PT, not necessarily go to someone else, but they just don't think they're actually going to use it. They'll be like, oh, I had a really good experience with this PT. And that's happened in the past. And so for me, that was so important to be able to do that. And that's transferred into the design industry. I actually went in the other day I said, people don't do face to face very often now. People send emails, everything is digital, and it can get lost. People may not see the email, they won't see the message. And for me, it was very much, I feel that one of our clients that we got was me just walking in the store. Um, I just asked them, who runs your creative? Do you have a team? Is it in house? Do you ever do external? And made a really good conversation with them. And in the end, we ended up doing so much for them. It's a place on Shaftesbury Avenue called Animetal. They're a big anime store. They're right next to Forbidden Planet, which is obviously their competitor. But from starting off doing something so small for them, we built such a good relationship where, we created all this content for them, and I have such a good relationship with the owner, and he's offered other things that he has a digital screen on the corner of Shaftesbury Avenue. People pay a lot of money to do display advertising, and he's offered me and the company, if you want to advertise yourselves there for free, I'm completely fine with it. And
mm,
having and doing that, which is why I'm always like I've never been that person who, once the hour was up with my client, I'm like, that's it, I'm done. Bye bye. I'm on to the next one. For me, it was very much, I don't mind spending the extra time because it's all worth it,
mm,
right? People don't
mm,
realize that the more you put in, the more you're going to get out.
mhm,
And I think that's just the way it is. But also at the same time, you have to understand which people are looking to have that type of relationship, because don't get me wrong, I've had clients before where it's very strictly business, and that's fine. you know I'm happy to just keep it that way. And then there are some who I can have a conversation afterwards. I can speak with
mm,
them after, and strengthen that relationship that I have with them. And I've been friends with some of my clients for over 10 years now, who I speak to this day. I meet up, and it's great. I think, sorry to go off topic, but I randomly, when
mm,
I was in London on Tuesday, I walked in Soho to Joe and the Juice, and I bumped in and I saw
mm,
one of my clients, and I was like, "Oh my God, Sally, it's so nice to see you. It was great." As soon as I walked in, another
mm.
person, David, tapped me on my shoulder, and he was like, "Eddie," and I was like,
Wow.
"Hey," and I was like, I hadn't seen him for like 8 years. He was someone that I trained with at Gymbox. He wasn't my
Mm,
client, but he was a member there, training with another PT, and it was just like,
mm.
oh, and it was so weird. I was like, I want to speak to both of you. It's so difficult to
Yeah,
to try
yeah.
and like get that conversation, but
Mm,
being able to have that is just such a nice thing as well. But yeah,
100%. So you touch on something else, like another one of my dilemmas is like I love fitness, but there's an aspect of the industry that I feel sometimes is not particularly authentic. Um, and when it comes to people are attracted to the visuals, as you said before. So people are attracted to, they'll choose a PT based on mainly based on the way they look. And I've always had an issue with when I'm training, like I love fitness. Fitness to me is like a form of meditation, and that's why I've tended to always do it as a solo thing rather than in a group setting.
yeah,
Um, And then people have said to me, oh, for you to get into fitness, what you should do is you should take your top off more and kind of show off a bit more. And it's
Sure.
like, it's not really me. So I feel like when I do it, I'm going completely against the grain. Um, and maybe it's my naivety, but I think that people that do really well in their businesses and their careers, they're doing something that just doesn't go against the grain. They're doing something that is authentically themselves. Um, and that means that you know, you're not spending lots of time thinking about and processing things that are just completely not you. You know, you're doing the things that you enjoy, you're doing the things that you love. um but then there's also a way of thinking that people will say, oh, if you can build yourself and get a six pack and all of this jazz, then that is, in a way, that's a gift that you should in some way use to benefit yourself in your career and in your business. um so yeah, it's that dilemma, you know, of gifts, hobbies, passions. Like, you know, where do you go? Like, what, you know, what pulls you or what should pull you? But yeah, how did you like like what advice do you have for somebody who's potentially in that position to follow? What should they follow?
It's really funny because when you're saying, I've heard that before, like, Eddie, like, you know, you need to put yourself on social media, you know, have your top off, do all this sort of stuff back in
Mm,
the day. And I was like, I just didn't like it. And don't get me wrong, I would, if I did do it, I would do it in the most, I guess, subtle, authentic way as possible. I think I took my daughter, I remember when she turned, I think it was like 10 years old, and me and some friends went to a water park and we were to wear wetsuits. And then during that, eventually, you know, everyone would undo the top part, but we're still wearing the bottoms part, and we had a group photo. I'm topless there, and I'm happy to share that photo, but it would never be, I wouldn't personally want to have to show the singularity of myself and everything like that. Um, for me, it was very much, I think in this day and age, it's a lot more acceptable. I think back then it was very much, you know, if you didn't look a specific way, then you're probably not a very good PT. And I think because the majority of people were focused purely on that visual aspect more than anything else. I think if I was to choose a PT, I'd want to know their qualifications, you know, what do they primarily focus on with their clients? You know, are they specifically for strength and conditioning? Are they for this or are they for that? And then it would be nice to know if they practice that themselves. And so everything that I would teach, I would only teach if I've done it on myself. You know, any systems, any sort of rep range or anything like that, I would be like, okay, let me try this on me first, and then let's see how it works with, you know, with other people. And so I would always explain to them that, you know, I'm only doing things that I would do for me because that's the way I train, and I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm not going to go and teach you Olympic lifting if I don't ever Olympic lift. You know, I'd rather give you that to someone. And I think that that line of knowing, do you know what? They're better suited with this person because that's what they specialize in. Is something that some people have to remind themselves that they don't need to take everything on. Like, work on your strengths. If that's something that you're better in, then, you know, use that. One thing I did find very useful, and I was told this in 2014 by another PT, and he said to me, "Oh, do you ever use LinkedIn?" I was like, no, I've never used it before. And so with LinkedIn, he says, oh, you should just get your clients to leave your testimonials and recommendations on there, which at
mm,
the time, you know, I had people sending it to me, but that's about it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that would be really good. And the part when you said, you know, so many people are visual, they want to see if you've got a six pack or anything like this. What I was able to do during that time was my goal was always to see if I can get a recommendation from a client, or even if it's one session or someone in my class that does my classes, to see if they would be happy to recommend me on LinkedIn. And so
mm,
I did that for over 10 years. And
mm,
so I was fortunate enough to build a large amount of recommendations on there. I mean, I have 140, 150 over the last 11
mm,
years. So it's not like someone recommended me 10 years ago and I've not been recommended since. It's like, oh, you know, last month, the month before, etc. And it's like, oh, he's
mm,
constantly being recommended. And you can see the type of people as well, from different
mhm,
ways of life, different jobs and everything. But
mm,
I would never try to sell myself and say to them, hey, I can do this. This is what I do. I'm like, look, here's my LinkedIn. Here are, my qualifications, what I specialize in, and
mm,
you'll be able to see recommendations from my current and past clients, which should hopefully give you the confidence to know that, if we were to work together, that you can feel confident that I'm going to be able to provide you with the support and service that you're looking for. And so I always said it to new PTs coming in and even designers. I always say to them, if you can get a reference, get these from like people you've worked with and everything, even if it's family and friends, build that so that you've got, a dedicated a number of people that are shown how much they trust in what you do, and that's just going to help the person if they're looking to work with you to trust you as well, rather than, I guess, in the fitness industry being able to be like, look, this is how I look. Yes, that's important, and I do feel that you don't have to have a six-pack, you don't have to do this, however, you do need to be able to show that that is something that you do. And I always think to myself, if you're a PT, and you don't like training, it's like, why are you doing it in the first place, sort of thing, right? If like, why are you doing a fitness and a physical exercise job where you're a bit like a doctor, right? So you hear that a lot these days with in the news, where you'll see, how can I take advice from a GP who is overweight and unhealthy, and they're trying to tell me how to specifically be? It's hard. That trust becomes harder to basically go with. And so in this situation, I'll be like, you don't have to have a six pack, but you do need to be able to show that that's something that you also have a passion for, which is why on social media, it doesn't have to be topless pictures, but, things that you do when you're training and also your experience. If you're very knowledgeable in what you do, that's something that you can share. Voice what you think. So having these sit downs, having the camera on you, it's never going to feel natural ever at the start, because if you don't do it every day, why do you think you're going to be good at it from day one? It's just not possible. But you do get more comfortable. And
mhm,
I have many PT friends who, their content is amazing, and, they sit in front of the camera and they go through these things, why it's important to take this. Here are studies that, have showcased why this is good for you, why this is good for you. And also sharing their clients, if they're happy to be shared on social media, showing
mm,
how you work with your clients. So again, it's that I don't need to show myself and show my physique. I can show you how I do things with my clients that would hopefully build that sort of trust. I can share
mm,
how they think about it. And at the same time, I can also share my knowledge to you. So that's how I think that you can still build a business, become successful in that without
mm.
having to make it about yourself, if that makes
Okay.
sense, or visually
Yeah, no,
yourself.
it does.
I think
Yeah, yeah.
design, it's a little bit harder, not harder, but harder because it is visual. The
Mhm,
whole
mhm,
point in the design industry is, what we're selling is a service that is going to visually interpret your brand, your core values, and everything else. So,
mm,
we need everything to look as best as possible, because that is a service you're trying to sell. And I've said that to the team many times, if it's not good enough, we don't show it on our website, we don't show it on social media, because if that's what we're showing and it's, on par quality, then
mm,
if a client, and I was the client coming to you, I was like, well, why do I want to go with you if that's the best you can do? So
mhm, mhm.
it's a little bit different, but yeah, sort of the same at the same time.
You've given me a lot to think about there. Yeah, because I'm still in that dilemma about going into the kind of the fitness. I've always been into media, into kind of the social media side. So initially started with doing fitness documentaries, and then I've gone from fitness documentaries to the whole kind of like podcasting. I tend to find when I'm doing the documentaries, I'm having these conversations, these interesting conversations anyway. and I'm a very curious person, so I like to ask people questions and find out about their lives and stuff. So that's kind of like steering me towards the podcasting interview realm. So this is like an elaborate way of like finding my late bloom. um but yeah, I was gonna say to you, like, you're still into the fitness, you're still training, as I can see. So how was the relationship between how has your relationship with fitness, your personal fitness, changed since now no longer being a personal trainer?
It has changed quite a lot, and I've had this
Mm,
conversation with some people who I haven't seen for a while, and I've gone through that conversation with them, telling them how it's not the same as it used to be. I mean,
mm,
I'm not 24 anymore.
mm,
I guess my mental strength, the way that I view things, is very, very different. It's
mhm.
also quite frustrating because you know you hear people who are older than you when you're a lot younger say to you these things, and you're always like, yep, yeah.
Mm.
But when you get to that age, you're like, yeah, they were right. And there's a
Yeah,
reason why
yeah.
they're right, because they've gone through however many years from the age you are to the age they are, and they know
Mm,
what happens and what's going to happen if you don't look after
mhm,
certain aspects of your fitness and your health. And so for me, whereas in my 20s and early 30s, it was very much, I wanted to visually keep up appearances and make sure that I was able to keep my physique in a specific shape and look and everything else. Over the time, I'm not as fussed about that. I'm not training 6 days a week for 2 hours trying to make sure that, I'm as shredded as possible. It's more of the case where now, I'm training for my health. I'm training for mobility. I am focusing on being able to move better, make sure that, I'm strong. Strength is such a underrated thing with many people. And, I always say, especially with women that I would train back then, was how great would it be to be able to do a pull up? It is harder for women, and being able to teach them to do that, and it's like, oh my god, I can do pull ups and push ups and do things body weight. That's something that's gonna transfer in everyday life. From oh my god, like I went grocery shopping, I was able to carry all these bags. It didn't feel that heavy. I had my luggage and I was lifting it up after I got off the plane. Like it felt so much easier. And all of those things are so important. So you think to yourself, those are things that you should be able to also dedicate time to. And it's not like you have to dedicate that much time to it. So I only train 2, 3 times a week. I try to make sure it's usually three. And I really do focus on a full body approach. I'm not doing, the classic chest and tries or back and buys and all this other stuff, because if I'm not able to go, then certain areas are going to end up not being trained. And for me, I'm always saying to everyone, if I do full body, I'm in there, I do 45, 50 minutes maximum. I record all my rest periods, I know exactly like the technique and everything else. I go in, I stretch afterwards, and then I'm done. Like I'm in and I'm out. I'm not there for the whole, few hours or etc. So for me, it's very much, I would just want to make sure I can get it in. Now, I'm very open to saying that if I don't train that week, and I for whatever reason I was only able to do one, people are like, oh, you're just being lazy, or you're just making an excuse. I was like, I'm not. It wasn't a priority that week. I had other things that I
mm,
needed to prioritize. And I think that's where it comes down to. When people would say I don't have time, I was like, it's nothing to do with time. It's not your priority. That's the
mm,
reason why. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to feel bad about it, but you need to own that at the same time. So for me, it was very much, why was I able to get into shape? Why was I able to train a specific way? Well, because I made it my priority. It was on my to-do list. It
mm,
was my top priority. And I also, as a trainer, I wanted it to be a priority to make sure that I'm trying to keep up, with my clients as well. If I'm telling them you need to be training this many
mm,
times a week, I'm like, I need to be also doing the same. I need to practice what I
mm,
preach and make sure that I'm committed as much as they are. It's a joint effort, I guess, with them. And so my training is definitely changed. I'm definitely working towards mobility and making sure I can move better. I'm fortunately in 2001, I think it was. Yes, 2001. So I've always had back pain and back issues. And in COVID, when I think it was April, when they first allowed the second wave where they said you can go to the gym. I went to
Mm,
the gym, I was training, I felt great, I did deadlifts, everything felt amazing. And I was like, oh, I'll finish off with just some dumbbell bent over rows. As soon as I did that, I felt my back go, and I was like, oh no. And I sat down and I was like, oh my God, I can't get up. I was like, I actually
mm.
physically can't stand up. I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to
Oh,
call someone. So I got one of the members, they got one of the staff, they were saying, can you move? I was like, I can't move. I was like, so that's called an ambulance. I also, in my
oh
head, was
wow.
thinking, I'm gonna become a meme. People are gonna film me, and I'm gonna be like, oh, first day back at the gym, and then the ambulance is there. They kept trying to give me gas, and I was like, I'm fine. Don't give it to me, because everyone's just staring at me. I was like, this is awful. And then I took the gas because it did actually help. Like they said, I could stand up. Went to the hospital, and they did all these tests and they checked and they said, no, you haven't slipped a disc. And I was like, so what the hell is it? So they knew that the weight that I was lifting wasn't very heavy for me. They said, oh, it doesn't look like that would be a problem. I said, no, I've done it before plenty of times. And so
Mm,
I ended up having an MRI at the top and bottom of my spine. So I had two, and did all these bone tests, blood tests, so many tests that eventually, and physio, and they said, I've basically got severe nerve damage at the top and bottom of my spine. So there are certain
oh
exercises you
wow.
just have to be aware of that you need to try
Mm,
and work on instead. And that really clicked with me, which is when I was like, you know what? I'm going to do things that I'm probably not massively keen on doing when I train, but I'm going to make the effort to do it because it's important in it. I don't want this issue with my back, to happen again. I had to wear a brace and all this other stuff. It was just, I think I was in training for 8 months, which was horrible when you work in a gym. And it's the second time it's happened because in 2016, I think it was, I had a boxing match and I dislocated my right shoulder in the boxing match in the third round. And I was like, and I had to take 8 months off then. Did so much rehab and everything. And so it's knowing that and understanding your body and being like, okay, I know what works, what doesn't work. And now I've done it for so long, like yourself, you will know these exercises I'm not going to do because I don't really like the way that they feel. However, I can do a different exercise for that muscle group, right? I always say there are many ways you can train a muscle. It doesn't have to be one specific way. At the moment, the way I would probably train now is very much on a I guess I would say mobility, but it's more like being able to move and feel fine moving in every direction. A lot of the time people are just doing, plain motions when they're training. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to try and be a little bit more flexible with that because all of that is going to come into play and work really well. So yeah,
mm,
it's very different to when, and also my weight is very different. I went from 60
mm.
kilos to 80 kilos. I stayed like that for many years. And then I went to 85, I think it was, and I stayed there, I think, for like 8 years. Oops, sorry, my little one's making a little noise.
Oh, it's
Um,
all right.
and then over the last 2.5 years, I'm now 100 kilos, which is something I'm not used to. I'd never
Mm.
had body fat ever. I've always been like ridiculously lean. And I was like, this is new for me. I've never had this before. But I've kind of like accepted and been like, I'm kind of happy with it. I feel I've now gone into this new phase. I joke about with my partner and say, I'm going for that dad bod Jason Momoa look,
Okay,
where
okay.
he's not necessarily got abs. He's big. You can see he's big and he's got muscles, and we're
He's
roughly the same
strong,
height
yeah,
and weight.
yeah.
I'm like, that's a good way to do it, and I'm fine
Mhm.
with that, that's completely fine. So yeah, working on different
Awesome.
areas, and I say this all the time, you need to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the way
Mhm,
that your
mhm,
body's going to be able to adapt and change. And it's very good at that. So pushing
mm,
myself to doing things I don't necessarily enjoy, that's where I'm going to get the best result from. So
mm.
yeah.
Like you've spoken with a lot of knowledge and still with a lot of passion about fitness. The majority of this conversation has been about fitness. So, like, would you consider getting like maybe when the kids are, much older, and they're kind of dealing with their own kind of lives, and they've left the nest, would you consider going back into fitness, or is that something that you've kind of completely washed your hands on?
I think from a professional background, it's definitely something that I've probably now decided to leave. I think I had a great time and a great chapter in my life being able to do that. I'm always, always open to giving advice for free, giving any help that I can. I mean, the other week I met someone in the gym and she was training and we needed to use the same machine and I was like, oh, like she asked like, what do I train and vice versa. And in the end, I was like, oh, if you're ever interested, let me share this like booklet I made with different systems that I've done. And I always used to say to people, you can teach someone an exercise, but when they go away, that's the only exercise they know. So I said, teaching someone the rep ranges and the different ways that you can train, you can apply that across multiple exercises. And I said, that's something that I'd like to be able to give to people. So I said, she turned on her airdrop. I sent it to her, both booklets. And I said, look, there are about 20 different systems from, German volume training, supersets, drop sets. And I've explained it all. And I said, try one, have fun with it. I'm not expecting anything else. I don't need anything in return. I'm just like, try it, and friends as well who ask me and family. I mean, my eldest daughter, she turns 18 in 2 weeks. I've taken her to the gym. I've shown her how to do things. And it's great because she can ask me, what's best to do. I would love to improve my fitness here. And obviously when
Mm.
my three youngest, my sons are obviously older, I'd happily be able to do it. I will be a lot older by the time they reach that age. However,
Yeah.
I'll still have the knowledge, so I can still share that and everything.
Okay. Man, that is brilliant to have an 18-year-old. You're looking like that age, man. You're holding on to your youth really well. So, I
Trying.
think this whole kind of graphic design, graphic illustration, setting up your own business, I think is doing you wonders. So
Thank
the
you.
last question I want to ask is like, is there anything else, that any other lessons that you've learned along the way, any mistakes that you've made that you'd want to share with people, or any last kind of words of advice that you'd want to, you know, um, can impart on somebody that's perhaps in the same position that you were a couple of years ago, in that dilemma of whether to continue with the PTing or do something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always say to everyone, you want to trust your gut and trust yourself and also trust the process. It's never going to be easy at the start. And I think the one thing that I'm always telling everyone is just don't give up, don't stop doing it. I did this because I wanted to be able to do something that I love and do it every day so it doesn't feel like work, and the problem that I had with fitness, it became and felt like work. And I always say to everyone, there are three things that you definitely need when you're doing a job. You need two out of three. And that is you need to either enjoy what you're doing, enjoy the people you work with, and be happy with how much you're making from that job. You only need two to be able to continue that role. And as soon as it becomes one, it's time to move on. And whether that's from the profession or from the actual place that you're working at, but you can't stay there with just only one. I can't stay in a place where I like what I'm earning but I hate what I do and I don't enjoy the people I work with. Or a lot of the time I love who I work with, I love who I'm working with, but I'm not getting paid enough, but the other two are keeping me there because those two things are just enough to keep me going. And so for me, very much so in this situation, I'm always saying to, it's going to be hard. It's never going to be easy at the start. And you just have to kind of accept that. And even in the role, we've had ups and downs in this year and a half of working. We've learned the process. We've learned to refine the way we do things. And that's really important for us. And I always say to everyone, there are things that you hear people say, oh, businesses, in the first year are the hardest thing. So many people quit. So many people quit within the first 3 years. It doesn't make any money within that time. But you just have to believe that it's gonna work. And if things aren't looking correct, you then have to think, what can I do to then change it? It's not like a normal day-to-day job where you go in, you get paid, that's it. If you don't work, you don't make money. If you don't try to do anything to progress the business, it's the same thing. It's not going to happen. So you're gonna people don't realize doing any sort of entrepreneurship that yes, it's great. I have my own business. I work for myself, but you have to remember all the other things that come with that, which is you're working every day. There is no day off. That's all really depending on you and how successful you want to be in. And so I
Mm,
tell everyone. I mean, we have three volunteers that work with us. They're fresh out of uni, 22, 20, and I think 22 again. And we're having
mhm,
meetings with them. They're working with us for 3 months. And, I'm always trying to share that advice, like, take as much as you can out of this, ask questions. If you've got a team that are willing to help you, do that. Try to get the experience, try to explore and do that. I mean, my daughter wanted to work with us, and I said, that's great, but I want you to find a job somewhere else to be able to go through those hardships and those challenges before coming here
mm,
thinking that I'm going to give you an easy
mm,
ride, because it's not going to be like that. I
mm,
like to work. I mean, I never touched on this, but I was diagnosed with bipolar like nearly 10 years ago, and I take my medication and everything. People always think,
mhm,
that what's your escapism? My escapism is work. And that sounds crazy,
mm,
but it's when I have these periods of lows and highs, and I put myself into my work because I don't think about anything else other than the work I'm doing.
mm,
It's great for clients because they know
mm.
now that I will work as much as I need to, but because it's my escapism, I really don't want anyone to mess around with that. I don't want them to ruin that for me. So, which is why the work ends up being important. It's very difficult with
Mm,
fitness because people would say use fitness as your escapism, but I was like, but it's my job. So it's very difficult to do that.
mm,
But for the first time in my life, now that it's been a year and a half of not doing that, I can use fitness as my escapism because it takes me away from my
mm,
desk. I get to go and I train, and I'm not there for the whole day. People forget if you're a PT, the majority of the time when you have a break, you don't want to be in the gym because you've been there for a number of hours. And why many
mhm,
PTs end up training somewhere else during their actual breaks because they don't want to train where they work. It's that same thing to keep things a little
mm,
bit separate. So I would 100% say to people, and even like yourself, when you're talking about, you're trying to think about what where do I want to lead with this? Where do I want to continue putting this passion that I have for fitness, and where can I continue
mm,
to grow it where I'm enjoying it and it's everything that I wanted out of this? And I would always say the fact that you've come this far with doing, the podcast and doing documentary and everything, this is a great thing to be able to do. The thing is you have all
mm,
the knowledge and everything in regards to fitness. You have the experience and everything like that. There are so many other avenues and routes to go rather than just
mm,
doing one-to-ones and doing classes. You just being a speaker and talking about things and being able to, express and share your experience to people is more than enough.
mm,
Going to expos and having people, listen to you and hear how you've come across things, how you can help and, you know, build that fitness um, passion that you have with so many people without having to
mm,
just be a PT. And I think people will now will now know that there are so many other areas of that industry where we're so lucky in this day and age where there are multiple platforms to share and execute our love for that. And I think what you're doing right now, especially, I was so happy when I saw your message and you asked me. I was like, yes, I'd love to. I'd love to be able to do this and talk with you and tell you. So
Ah,
it's definitely something. I
thank you,
do
man.
seem to drag my answers, so I do apologize.
No, no, this is what this is what I enjoy the long form because I think we are we're given too much too many kind of snacks on social media, so it's important to have longer form answers and proper conversations. So no, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Just like you just said, so many people are so, and I hate that term, but it is a term that's gone out TikTok brain because we're fed so much small, short form of content where we're just literally, it's difficult for the younger generation to be able to basically concentrate on something that's longer than 10 to 30 seconds. And it's like, we're digesting so much content so fast, so much media everywhere that people forget
Mm,
long form is actually so important and there's so much you can learn from that. So I definitely am a massive supporter of long form content, being able to listen to a podcast and listen, even if I don't get to watch it. I'm always saying to people, put it up, share it. I will 100% have it on in the background whilst I'm working because I want to be able to listen to these discussions because no one's doing that in the short version because it's not as appealing, right? You know, people think, oh, okay, they've split up this long form into like 10 seconds. It's like, you know, so I'm 100% down for that.
Brilliant, brilliant. You made me like one other question has come to mind. You touched on making the shift from being a PT to getting like running your own creative agency, and that being a bonus in terms of spending more time with your children. Um, a very personal question. Don't need to answer it if you don't want to. But how is it? How has the shift improved your relationship with your partner?
It's funny because we've had this discussion, me and her, before, where you're gonna, especially at the beginning, right? Because I always say at the beginning of every business, and you hear it all the time, it's the most hardest part because you're starting off, you're learning your craft, because it's not just being a designer or just being a PT, it's being a business owner and you're having to cover many different bases. And so you're going to be putting the majority of time within those first 3 years to make sure that you can make it a success. And I guess
Mm,
with my partner, you know, she noticed and we spoke about it, and you know, she said, oh, you know, I feel I see you less even though you're in the house, which is crazy.
okay,
And
okay.
it's true. And I get told that and I'm like, "Do you know what, you're right." And even, you know, my son will come up and I'll be like, I will say to him, tell me that if you want to do something, tell me if you think I need to take a break, just
Mm,
communicate it to me. And I'm always like that. Communication will always be the biggest thing. So I'm like, just tell
mm,
me, I can then think about it, because I myself can get lost in my work and I'll be
mm,
here for hours, and you know, I'll forget to eat or I'll forget to do something, and they're the ones who are there being able
mm,
to remind me about that. The biggest part is, as long as you have their support and you communicate
mm,
everything all the time, we're able to have a really good balance of that. So, for example, like the sports day, you know, she told me it's his first one on Thursday. I don't remember these things because it's not on my mind,
mm,
but she
mm.
will remind me. And then I'm like, I need to be there. She's like, yes, and I'm like, perfect. I'll put that time in. It's in
Mm,
my calendar, and I'm gone from that time, and that's what I'm doing. And so she'll
mm,
remind me of another time. You know, he's got his first swimming lessons on this day. I'm like, all right, after school, I'll do it. I'll work from this time, and that's great. So it's managing my time, but making sure if I'm not gonna be able to be there all day long, I'm there for the important parts as much as possible. And
mm,
so for us, even trying to get our time, I will tend to say to myself, do you know what? I'm going to stop working from this time because
mm,
I can work and continue to work. I don't like, there's no time, right? It's just constantly, always ongoing. And so
mm.
I would say to, I will stop working from, you know, 9 p.m. You know, as soon as 9 p.m. hits, I'll stop. That's when I'll
Nothing
stop
done.
working. And so, you know, it's the same sort of thing. So yeah, I think the relationship and working from home, it is difficult, and starting your own business. But yeah, my advice will always just be being able to have the conversation about it with everyone, making sure everyone understands everything, and also being open to hearing them if they need to, you know, uh, basically share how they're feeling about it, if you're not spending enough time, if you need to do this, and
Mm,
just being
mm.
understanding within that, having the right balance. And it will always be about balance. I would
A
always say that.
balance, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I've got
Well,
three
I mean,
dogs. So my
as
dogs
well.
also, I feel bad about, they're not getting their time. And I'm like,
Mm,
dogs, I need to make sure I have my time with you guys as well. So it's like, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, your partner's been there since your PTing days, right? So, she must have seen a big change in you in terms of your personality and your health, your mental health, I guess.
Actually,
And
it's
that can
funny
only.
that you said that because my current partner is not the partner that I was with when
Oh,
when
sorry,
I was
sorry.
doing it. So basically, my partner during my PT career was my childhood sweetheart, who my two eldest kids are, you know, 18, pretty much 18 and 9.
Okay.
And that was between 20 and 30. So we went our separate
Mhm.
ways, just because we're very different now. But we have an amazing relationship because we've known each other since we were kids. You know, she's just recently got engaged. Her partner is amazing. She's got a third child. super, super cute. And we're very fortunate, you know, we don't have to deal with all the drama that many relationships when they split after a long time have. And so, you know, my eldest child, who is turning 18, she lives with me. You know, she wanted a change, and you know, it's been nice having her live with me now. You know, rather than you know coming on weekends or during some holidays, etc. So my current partner, who you know, we've been together for you know nearly 10 years, and so she understands the process when I was a PT. Up until this new transition. But I've spoken with you know my ex partner about it, and she's obviously expressed how does it work, how does it find it, and again, it will all just come down to just communication. Like you just need to be able to keep everything as open and transparent as possible because then there's no one can say anything because you've said everything, to be honest. But they both understand from the mental health side, you know, how I've transitioned and how I've gone through it. Whether you know one who was there before I was diagnosed and one that's been there since I've been diagnosed. So they both had two different experiences with it. So the support from both has obviously been immense, and it's helped me throughout you know the transition of changing from one career and going back to another, for sure.
Eddie, if if this kind of creative agency life, if if after a few years you're like, oh, maybe I should consider something else, maybe you should consider kind of like life coaching, because in this last hour that I've chatted to you, I've just like my head's just gone ding 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 ding. I'm gonna have to take notes when I start editing this, man. This has been brilliant.
Oh
Um,
no, thank you. That's really, really
I'm
sweet of you.
I'm so happy that you've kind of like spared the time to do this, and I've got a couple of interviews that I've recorded, and I'm going to go through and edit. So yeah, as soon as this is up, and unfortunately I'm going to have to do the snippet, the usual social media snippet thing, and
That's okay.
cut this up into pieces, and kind of throw it up online. Yeah, as soon as that's done, I'll give you a shout, and let
Oh
you know when
please,
stuff's kind of dropping.
my colleague was saying he was so happy that I was going to be doing this, and he said he's always trying to get me in in front of the camera, and I absolutely hate it. I did try it for a little bit, and I said to him, it just feels so unnatural. I don't mind doing like a podcast voice and talking, but it's the
Yeah,
visual. There's too
it's the
much
visual.
editing. I have to edit if I look weird when I'm saying something, but with the voice one, it's so much easier just to chop and change,
Yeah,
you know. But
yeah.
he wants to share it on our socials. He wants us to put it,
Oh,
you know,
brilliant. Yeah,
even
yeah,
on my
yeah,
website, on our LinkedIn and everything. So as soon
yeah.
as you have it, 100%, just share everything that you've got, even not just our conversation, but everything else that you've got. We'd happily be able to share that. And I want to actually listen to more of it, 100%.
Okay,
And even when
okay,
I come into
brilliant. Thank
London, it'd
you.
be great just to catch up and meet up in person.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it'd be really nice, because yeah, Frankie's like, she's been like kind of singing your praises for like ages, and I think we've met like maybe once or twice, but it was never like, it was kind of like in the periphery. It wasn't like a
yeah, yeah,
proper
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of sit down and have a drink or have something to eat. So
Yeah,
that would
I
be
would
really
love to
nice.
do
Yeah,
that. Honestly,
yeah,
would
that
really
would be
love.
awesome.
I will send you a message after this anyway with more details and stuff. So 100% would love to be able to do that. It would be incredible. But yeah.
Nice one, Eddie. Thank you so much for this, mate, and enjoy the rest of your day. Don't work too hard. I know you've got the 9 p.m. cut off, so
I will
so
try.
yeah.
I'll try,
All
which is
right.
perfect.
Cheers.
Amazing.
Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. I'll
All
speak
the
to you
best.
soon. Take care.
Take care,
Bye.
mate. Bye.